information sessions that give you a real taste of some of the key leadership areas that you as our community have told us you were interested in. And when we surveyed our community, this topic, advocacy influence, was right at the top of your priority list. So that tells you a lot about the Nursing Now Challenge community. And we had to think really hard about who do we invite to bring this topic to life for just this 1 hour to get us thinking, to start the debate and the conversation. And I just couldn't think of anybody better than Aisha, Holloway and Joanne, Bosanquet. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. Now, Aisha is absolutely a familiar face to you all as the previous programme director of Nursing Now Challenge, but now Chief Nurse of Scotland. And Joanne is a chief exec of a charity called the Foundation of Nursing Studies. And I've heard personally both Aisha and Joanne speak really passionately about the unique perspective that nursing brings to a debate, to an agenda, in a room often where nursing has either been ignored or hasn't previously been invited to take part in those debates. And it takes real strategy to get to a position where we're able to have that influence and that voice. So my hope today is that we can learn from those that have stepped this path before us, and to be able to ask those questions to demystify what do we mean when we talk about influence and advocacy and using our voice as a profession. So I'm going to hand over to Aisha first of all, and you will start us off with today's conversation. Really looking forward to it.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Gemma, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you, and Jo and I have had some conversations about how we would like to run this session. So our first perspective, as you would imagine, from someone coming from a more academic background, into that space of really going into some of that theory and some of the translation of that into practice. So we'll do that. I'll touch on some of those elements, and then Jo is going to make it really come to life for you with the work that she does as an important stakeholder. So we'll get that foundation there of maybe the why and how, things we have to think about, the preparation phase really, before we do the engagement, and Jo will take that piece on. So first slide, please, which is just the intro slide, give you a sense of what we're going to talk about today. And Martine is just hopefully going to load that up for me at the moment. You should see it on the screen shortly. Yes, okay, so using political science theory to understand how global health initiatives are framed, prioritised and resourced. So when we're looking to engage in terms of our advocacy and political influencing, it is really useful to understand what is the evidence telling us about this. How does it help us to understand and explain that landscape and the actors in it, and how we can, as clinicians, professionals, stakeholders, engage. And this is a perspective, next slide, that I want to just run through with you. So framing this within Nursing Now Challenge, I guess, as a global health network and the challenges faced, but there are many of these networks around. How that science lens facilitates our understanding. Frame and framing, really, really useful and important fundamental anchor to advocacy. The power and influence of actors. So who do we know them to be? Not just our own selves as clinicians, but the others who operate in that landscape, and the influencing processes, how they are structured, framed, or could be structured and framed, and help you understand of the work that is required. It's not as simple as we see something we want to change, we want investment in a particular area, but we really do have to get into the why and the understanding. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just kind of center this around some of the assumptions and some idea of the complexity of that decision making. The slide is just taking a little bit of time to load. But I would like to think that you see as yourself, I would like to see you thinking of yourselves as these nurse policy entrepreneurs. And this is not a new thing. If we look at the references I've cited here, purposefully to demonstrate that over a decade ago, more than that, 10, 15 years ago, people were talking in this way. And you'll see the references there that in 2011, the IOM, which is now the National Academy of Medicine, called for nurses to be policy participants for change. And we talk a lot about agents for change and change agents within Nursing Now Challenge, and not merely spectators. We're not only suitable, but also professionally obliged to be involved in policy making. We see it as advocates of nursing and bringing that professional expertise. The value that we demonstrate as nurses becomes increasingly involved in those policy making to improve care, to benefit clients, families, and society. That really is at the very hub of what it is and why we want to engage in this space. Historically, we have been involved in policy changes related to our own scope of practice. However, nurses can do even more in that political realm as they increase the use of patient experience to advocate and for patients in the legislative arena. We see in some countries that really much more present. We're seeing a lot of that in Spain. And I know Andres is on the call here today of how they're mobilizing themselves into that space and doing very well. In the US, much more established, etc. So nurses today are able to advocate for stronger policies and through that role of nurse policy entrepreneur. Next slide, please. But before we even get started on trying to make sense of policy making, we need to understand how challenging, complex it is. Paul Kearney talks about politics and public policy, and he has a blog. And he describes this beautifully. You won't have a clear opportunity to inform well-defined and orderly stages of policy making. So that we can't come on here and say, if you do 1, 2, 3, and 4 steps, it will happen. Defining the problem and formulating the solutions and making those choices really require us to understand the issue as it has been as it has come to the fore, and the size and proportion of the problem, the demands for those solutions, and the feasibility of those. Are they feasible technically? Are they feasible financially? Can they be implemented? Can they be sustained? Have we got capacity for those? So these are things that we have to consider, and policymakers might have the motive and opportunity to select a workable solution, but only if it is politically feasible. Next slide, please. So already you see there are many things, many dynamics, defining the problem, solutions, selecting solutions, when it comes to that window of opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit about that window of opportunity. Entrepreneurs learn how to surf this wave, testing out, refining their solutions within policy networks, anticipating the lurches of attention and political events that give a choice or the chance to propose them. And I love this. Those waves might come tomorrow, a year, a decade, or more, or never. And we have to be prepared. And I remember Teresa Fife, who was the Deputy CNO at the time. She was my boss when I was a very young nurse in my first post, and she became the Director of the Royal College of Nursing for Scotland. She told me when she was in her Deputy CNO role, she had a drawer full of proposals, ideas that were just ready for that wave to come. So there might be other windows of opportunity to translate those choices. And they might not necessarily be directly related to us, but they can help us get an inroad. And their timing, frequency, duration are unpredictable. In large policy systems, the scale of the task can be overwhelming for one individual. So it's about understanding who the relevant actors are and the multiple roles that they play. And we will talk a bit about this. Next slide, please. I'm just going to give you a couple of visuals on kingdoms, and you've probably heard about this. It's one of the most recognised kind of frameworks for understanding policy influence and that window of opportunity that comes, and that multiple streams framework of the problem, the policy, and the politics that converge together with that policy window when the streams join together and the policy entrepreneurs increases that probability of policy change. So that's not just from influence we're actually talking about the next step of achieving that policy change. Next slide shows a slightly different version of that, maybe a cleaner, more visually appetizing visual of it, and the window of opportunity into that agenda setting. Next slide, please. And just moving swiftly on to the policy entrepreneur. Our function, defining and reframing problems, because sometimes how it's framed may not be the way that we would frame it in a professional context, and devising possible alternatives, facilitating the agenda setting with decision makers. So that's about that collaboration, that working together, that partnership. Next slide, please. So how do policymakers really make these decisions? And I guess what I'm setting out here is what Paul talks about. It would be a mistake for us to focus on reducing uncertainty on the assumption that high quality evidence speaks for itself. Evidence alone will not generally move things along. It requires other types of engagement, the use of stories, argumentation towards to draw the policymakers' attention to the issue, persuading them of the value of your interpretation. So we have to be very adept. I think nursing sits itself hugely importantly within this space, and we perhaps don't naturally see ourselves in this space. But if we think about our everyday practice, then those skills actually we do have. We just haven't framed them in the way or seen it through a lens of what we're talking about. So Kingdom's entrepreneurs recognise the need to engage simultaneously with the technical and the political elements, persuading policymakers that a technically and politically feasible solution already exists. So, I guess it's about not just raising the issue or advocating, but bringing the solution. And there's nothing better than a solution that is already being implemented somewhere else, smaller scale, different country context, that could be adapted and acceptable enough to people in the policy network. And again, that's about us having these networks like we have here with Nursing Now Challenge. Don't operate in isolation. Join together. What is working? I mean, we have so much to learn from our other continents. And that's where you will see things working very well. If I take one example of task shifting and sharing for midwifery, I was involved in a project in Liberia where they were doing cesarean sections and surgical procedures. Nurses who had had the appropriate training, working with the regulator, working with government, working with all of the actors together to make this possible, the implementation of protocols, etc., pathways, and the decision making made that happen. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we adapt to our own context? So I gave the example of Liberia, but what could that look like here? What could the other context look like here? So different political systems have different rules. So for everyone on the call here, this might be different wherever you are in the world. So you have to adapt what I'm saying today to that. Some things you'll recognize, some things you're like, that will be really difficult. And again, organizations like ourselves and others are useful places for us to be in that safer space. So the actors who are influencing one element, as in setting out the agenda or identifying the priority, may be less important in another. And that's where I think we have to become more aware that we may not be the people that are the priority all through the journey of that change and the advocating. It might be that we are very front and centre. Later on, we sit back, we come in again later on. This is a dynamic process. Brokering those collaborations and multiple delivery organisations. So when we had that framework, there are variations to the rules of that. So I guess what that does, it helps you, the framework will help you reflect on your activity in the context, and then you can zoom in and out into examining the venue, the opportunity within your particular area and understand how that relates. Next slide, please. So that's really me hoping to set the scenes. The assumptions here are that global health networks exist to raise the profile of certain challenges. They're made up of groups of individuals, organisations, communities, shared health concern, and their activity of these networks includes advocacy, influencing, coalition building, huge thing, coalition building, and other related activities. And I would imagine that nursing now is the first one that would come to mind, that kind of these assumptions are set out here. Next slide, please. Just thinking about how we are thinking about how we tackle this and gain the increased traction and support. Can we define the problem? Generating consensus is hugely important. That's where the coalitions will come in. Positioning it. How do we position the issue, and less seeing it as a problem, but seeing it as something that will, if we were able to take the relevant action, will become solution and more. So there will be a greater return on investment. There's the coalition building, the governance for facilitating collective action. And then thinking about the legitimacy of the network. Do we have the right to exert power and challenge? And I think that's always useful, just minding our role as professionals and where that red line and where the boundary is for us or the organisation we work within. Next slide, please. So this is just a paper that I think is really useful into International Journal of Health Policy Management by Jeremy Schiffman, and he is an academic whose work I absolutely think is very useful for us to consider. So next slide, please. If you want that details, we can give it to you at the end. So the 4 challenges that face networks or individuals or groups of people are getting that problem definition and the consensus. So that's the first thing you need to do. Positioning it. How do we do that to inspire audiences, external and internal and across stakeholders, because they have different agendas? What is the governance? How do we take and facilitate that collective action in a way that is appropriate, relevant, and within the boundaries of our organisation or our scope as professionals? And the coalition building, forging those alliances. So often doing a stakeholder mapping exercise is really useful to find out who are all the people in this area, in this arena, and not just seeing them as, well, they want that, so we have nothing to do with them. We have to come together and coalesce and understand we all have skin in the game, as we would say. Next slide, please. Context, hugely important. Health issues crowd the global policy space. We see that currently governments have finite finance, for example, or research organisations have only specific amount of funding, etc. And there's lots of issues that people want to prioritise, and only a small number will really attract that attention or financial resource. So what people like Jeremy Schiffman are trying to do is try and understand under what conditions we get an ideal traction on this. And next slide, please. I think that's really important for us to be really smart and strategic here. Framing is a socio-political process shaped by power. Next slide, please. Useful ways to analyse and frame. Consider the actors involved, understand what their function, what their prioritisation is, the forms of power they deploy and their motives, the types of frames they advance, the forms of collective action, and any resistance that their initiatives elicit. So there's a lot to do, not just on our own framing, but what is going on around us with these other stakeholders, actors, organisations. Next slide, please. And what we see is contested process shaped by resistance, some elite attempts at dominance, a democratic deficit. This is the reflections from the work of Jeremy Schiffman. So you'll see it's a complex space. It's not easy for us to be operating in that environment. A number of things to take account of. My message here today is, so I guess, to help you understand that we are able to do this, we have to remember some of these elements. Next slide. And the role they play and how they influence how we would mobilise as clinicians, or you would. Frame and framing, what do they mean? What do we mean by that? And what do I mean by that? And how is it used? And I really want to just draw your attention really to the bit in red. Framing and frames commonly encompass beliefs about an issue's causality, includes what and who is to blame for its existence. I'm less comfortable with that kind of phrase blame. It's not a productive word. Its solutions, including who's responsible for solving it, and its importance, especially why it merits public action. So frames are really simplifications of reality. They never encompass all aspects of the issue. So any issue can be framed in many ways, and we see that when we see opposing views of the same thing. Next slide, please. The emergence of frames really help us to understand how actors speak of and come to understand an issue. So I think that's for us to take on board. How do we understand the issue wider than what our own, I guess, perspective and lens is? The strategic deliberation, portraying issues in ways they think will achieve a specific purpose, recruiting members, attracting funding. Produced through global initiatives, emerge from local sources, and most are products of multi-directional flows of information. Framing rarely unfolds smoothly. It commonly is a contested and iterative process. So your language and your framing may change as the landscape and the political policy-making landscape shifts. And sometimes that happens very quickly and rapidly, and sometimes it takes on over many decades. Next slide, please. Actor collective action, just very quickly on this slide, we see international organisations facilitating cooperation, which say WHO is one of those. Then we see some social movements, which are transnational advocacy campaigns, networks, civil society organisations, social justice, human rights. Then we have the scientific initiatives, which is more about that epistemic, that's what we call it, those epistemic communities, scientists, academics, researchers, who are trying to address the problem from a very scientific evidence prescription. Next slide, please. So the layers are there. We're just moving on to this last point of the presentation. These three elements that Schiffman has identified is, how do we frame things? Not saying it's exclusive or the only way, but it's an emerging observation he has identified. Securitization, is the issue being framed as an existential threat? Moralization as an ethical imperative, or technification, a wise investment that science can solve? And we're identifying these because it maybe help you understand how you would frame your issue. These framing processes can concern how the issues are portrayed publicly. They are evident there in everything we do. So I think now when you're observing those areas of contention, of challenge for us, thinking maybe about them in a different way like this would be interesting. Next slide, please. I want to keep these in mind. And these are some examples that Schiffman came up with that should be very helpful for you to understand. So 3 elements within the global health challenges. And we have Ebola, HIV treatment and reproductive health, and then tropical diseases and newborn survival. And he's looked to use that categorization in each of these. And the dominant frame, we talked about existential threat, ethical imperative, wise investment, that epistemic element is in that dominant frame. Identifying who the actors are, governments, civil society networks, or experts. Who are the principal actors and what's their motivation? Fear, indignation, deploying science to solve a problem. And the principal actors, the form of power use, compulsory, normative, epistemic, collective action, interstate, social movement, scientific. And what I like about this, because my brain works in quite a process logical way, if you had your issue, how would you fit it into a table like this? It might not fit in, but for some things, it might do if it's a health challenge, for example. But I think it will help you understand if you can frame it in that way, understand the actors, what's their motivation, how would we find solutions? Next slide, please. And just turning this information on its head using the same examples, we then see why the issue, well, not why, but that some of these issues have struggled. So if we compared Ebola to cholera, for example, and then we look at the estimated mortality or morbidity, because sometimes we use that data to make an argument. And actually, the deaths occurred, and the data is probably not more, this data came from the published paper, so it's probably a little bit out of date, but you will see that often the size and scale is not often the thing that leads to the attention being raised and it becoming a global priority. That's Schiffman's, kind of thesis here, or he's putting it out there for us to actually contemplate and think that. Similarly, HIV, diabetes, and we see a shift in HIV and AIDS around treatments. And then we see the tropical diseases and surgically treatable conditions. Again, the comparison of the issues that vary in the extent to which they have been securitized, moralized, or technalized. Next slide, please. So my take-home messages, just as I have given you a whistle-stop tour of hopefully helping you to think differently about this. Don't go to the natural way. Understand the complexities, the levels, and understand their evidence is there to try and help us, I guess, explore the ways and positions that we can take. My take-home messages to you would be that as policy entrepreneurs, nurse policy entrepreneurs, we are needed to connect the problem, the policy, and the political streams and search for those windows of opportunity. If they are not there, do not stop what you are doing if you believe that that's the thing that is required, because hopefully at one point that wave will come and you will be riding it and there will be an opportunity and you have to be ready. So your networks, your knowledge of the processes to create action. Policy entrepreneurs are able to promote conversion during a policy window, having the ability to strengthen collaboration, more successful in creating change. The attributes for success of policy entrepreneurs sit closely within taking action when the opportunity arises, your ability to use networks. I cannot highlight that enough. Those networks are really, really important, and possessing the expertise on the subject. Well, as clinicians, we are the experts along with our, however we want to call them, service users, people with experience, etc., and how we work together. Proper framing of the issues requires a systematic analysis of the problem, the policy, and the political streams. Do your homework and prepare. Build your networks, both operational, development, and strategic. Give to your network before you take. So see your network as a place that you can contribute to. See and understand the issue from all angles and through different lenses, and secure mentors and supporters. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope that was a little bit illuminating and interesting for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aisha. It was, more than. And I really chimed in with that terminology of policy entrepreneur. So seeing the window of opportunity and being ready to act when that arises. And I think a really great segue into Joanne's examples. We've had lots of windows of opportunity, haven't we, Joanne? And we've ridden some of those waves, made some real progress. And I think a prime example would be the clinical supervision example, wouldn't it? So I'm really looking forward to your reflections, Joanne, bringing this to you, some examples, some of real world stuff that's happened through your work. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Aisha. That was absolutely brilliant, as always. And I take it the slides will be available to everybody after today's session. Sorry, just get back again. I was amending, obviously, as Aisha was talking. Taking some out, putting some in. So yeah, I'm Joanne. I am the Chief Executive at the Foundation of Nursing Studies, and this is my 7th year. And before I was in the third sector, charity sector in the UK, I was the Deputy Chief Nurse for Public Health England, and I held that position for just under 7 years. And before that, I worked as a nurse consultant in practice. So I've gone from working with people and individuals to working with families, to working with populations, and then working within a policy and professional practice environment where we were delivering services, and I professionally led about 300 health protection nurses and others within the organisation. But also I was sitting at tables, often being the only nurse in the room for most of that time. It was a huge remit, and so the chief nurse, Viv Bennett, took one side of the portfolio and oversaw everything, but then I would take another, because that's how it works, and that is how it works really within our government chief nursing officers team as well. Certainly, within England, I know that the deputy chief nursing officers each have their own portfolios, which is really important for you to kind of know that. So I've put a photograph of myself on the top right. It's a bit cheeky. It's a bit of an advertisement of a book that's a very important book that's just been published, co-edited by a very good friend of ours, Claire Cable, and Gemma and I were very lucky to be included in the book. And it's, we need this book more than ever. And if there's something that you want on your Christmas card list or your birthday list, then I very much advocate for you to get this book. So just wanted to say that in the chat while Aisha was talking, we'd had a few comments. So Felicia and Swizzle they were searching, actually, Aisha, they were searching for that window of opportunity for, how do we get policy and practice in, how do we get our own stories and our own influence into that policy sphere, but then how do we get it into our education? How do we make sure that we get it in the undergraduate and postgraduate education? And that is really important. So for the UK, yes, I know a lot about that, but I'm not sure about other parts of the world. So I'd be grateful if anybody wanted to reflect on what Swizzle and Felicia were putting in the chat, and just start having some reflections yourself. And then Peter, it's great to have you here. You remind me often, and have done on social media forever, for as long as I can remember, about the Hodges model, which has always included the kind of political policy domain for nursing, and it's very, very important. And I'm really grateful that you're here today, and that the participants of the webinar have got this resource. So, why are we here? Why are you here today? Just, you don't have to do it right now, but maybe a few words in the chat about, why are you here? Why have you dedicated an hour of your day to this session? And, what does advocacy mean to you? When I think back to when I was a student nurse, when I was 19 to 22, and then an early career nurse, I didn't use the word advocacy. It was not in my vocabulary. It wasn't in the vocabulary of my family, and it wasn't in the vocabulary at the time of my nursing education. But when I think back about how I was brought up and the influences that I had in my community and my family, we are natural advocates. We advocate. That is what we do. You know, we stand alongside people. We experience things with other people. We are thinking of other people. We are trying to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. We're trying to walk a mile in other people's shoes. And so I grew up in a situation where we gave back. Public service was very important to my whole community, really, including myself and my family. So even though I didn't have a word for it, I would always put relationships first. um, I would, share decision making before it was a thing. I never tried to make a decision on behalf of somebody else. I would always try and stand by their side, and I always tried to be authentic. And so, most people that know me on this call, will have seen me make many mistakes in my career, and because I am me, and I try not to be anybody else. But sometimes it doesn't always go your way. But it's about how you deal with that, and um, how you build back from that failure, because we're all going to do that. And because when you're putting your head above the parapet, you're vulnerable. You are quite vulnerable to the space that you're in, and it takes quite a lot of confidence and grit and determination sometimes to do that. I've been using AI. This is what I love AI. I love AI for this. I couldn't have drawn this on the left-hand side. If you'd have given me a year, I wouldn't have been able to draw it. But I had all the words. I just asked it to do this, and it did it. So I quite like it. It's a bit of fun. And when I was thinking about what I'm doing today and what Aisha's doing, I wanted to think about where I started. And where I started was from very humble beginnings. I didn't do a degree in nursing. I did a 3-year apprenticeship, really, back in 1989. And I had no knowledge at the time of the global politics, geopolitics, or we just didn't. We probably looked about as far as the placement that we were on, or the school of nursing we were in, or the group of people that we were working with. And we were never really encouraged to ask questions and to look further. And it wasn't until I was 26 that I realised that I didn't know enough about people and about communities and populations in the world. And I started asking many more questions than I'd done before. And I found a university where I lived that did a degree in health studies, and that's what kicked it off for me. This is what enabled me to start to put words into feelings that I had around inequalities and um, uh, you know health for all, health in all policies, all the stuff that we kind of that rolls off the tongue nowadays. I knew that there were many inequalities and wider determinants of health and well-being that were meaning that people were coming in and out of hospital, and I kept seeing the same people, and I didn't know why. And but in this box of a hospital, that was it, really. People would come in and then they'd go again, and then we wouldn't see them again, or we would. And so I decided to go to university, and that's what I did. And I didn't think I could get a degree, but I did get a degree, and it changed everything for me, because I was with like-minded people, like you are, like you all are. And I was able to be vulnerable, and I was able to kind of ask those curious questions that I felt a bit silly asking, or I built my confidence to be able to be vulnerable and not know the answer to things. And I think when I think back about when I was at university in 1996, there was no internet. We didn't have any internet. There was no smartphones or anything like that. And so my political and policy inquiry started by going to the library and looking at the census. I looked at the census data and these huge books, these massive books that went on and on and on. And I just sat and I trawled and I looked for patterns and tried to recognize what was going on to connect with the thoughts that I was having. And I was advocating, I was political. I was interested in policy. I didn't call it party politics, and it wasn't party politics. And I didn't have any desire at the time to go into party politics, but it was political. And I met some phenomenal lecturers who I'm still in contact with now, Eileen O'Keefe, who was a professor and did a lot of voluntary work in her community with the community health councils, which are now no longer. And she introduced me to Action. And I'll show you. There's an article further down that I've just put in. I've put an extra slide in that I'd love you to read after today, which puts a lot of words into the work that I was doing at 26. I wasn't quite placarding, but I was asking very, very tough questions to people that I perceived had the power, and asking and then trying to kind of phrase those questions around evidence. And so Aisha was talking earlier on really importantly about evidence, and whether you're talking to each other, whether you are discussing anything within a classroom situation or at work, any local policy or treatment guidelines or anything like that, it's really important that we don't just take it, on face value. We must always have that inquiry state of mind and that kind of curiosity. And the way that we do it as nurses and midwives is really much more down to how our communities would speak to one another. I do try my best to look at how well I'm explaining something to somebody and whether or not they're understanding it, and kind of using all those non-verbals, and that's really, really important. And then within teams, I suppose this kind of advocacy within our teams is important, because some of the behaviours that we're seeing and we do see around can be quite toxic, and that sometimes comes from people who are masking. Perhaps they have got a neurodivergence that they're masking, or they just don't understand, but they don't have the confidence or don't feel safe enough in that environment, to be curious and ask those questions. And so it's really, really important that when we are curious and asking those questions, that we are taking into account everybody around us and how that might be feeling for people. And I think the hierarchy in nursing sometimes doesn't help. We are hierarchical. We've always been hierarchical, and sometimes hierarchy is extremely important. Somebody has to be in charge. We have to have high levels of accountability, high levels of autonomy, but with that, high support and high challenge. And you can only grow that over time. You can't assume that you'll go into a team or an organisation or a society, and you can't go in and assume that everybody's on the same page. So, I talk quite a lot about a social contract. You can call it all different kinds of things, but sometimes people call it ways of working. So when maybe you're new into a team or you're new into a space, you might not know the culture of that team and how they work. And really good practice, and we do it within my organisation, is that we regularly go back to our ways of working that we've evolved and run over time. And that really enables us to, shoulders down a bit, sit down a bit, so that you're a bit more in receiving mode than kind of, so that you're really, really open, and that you're present within that environment, so that you can really listen to what people are saying, because very often it's the non-verbals as well as the verbals that really kind of get you to think, hang on, what's going on here? So it's really complicated. This is not easy. Advocacy is really, it's so important. It's in our code of professional conduct. It's in Social Council of Nurses definitions. It's everywhere. And when we're looking for nurses and midwives for health equity, well, how on earth can we have equity and healthcare for all and social care for all if we do not know how to advocate for those either that are unable to advocate for themselves, or to advocate for policy and political change in some respects, really. And so I just wanted to see whether, now I can't see this, so I'm going to rely on Professor Holloway if you want to. There's no pressure at all, but just why don't you think we do use our voice? I mean, there are some obvious ones which I'm not going to go through. I'll let you put those in. There are some obvious ones, but why do you think we don't always use our voice? And if you want to just put a few things in the chat, please do. If you don't feel that it's a safe space to do so, then that's okay too. But I think for me, if I say what my reflection is, when was the last time you spoke up for somebody and how did it feel?
Mhm.
I don't like confrontation. People probably don't believe that about me. But I do mask. I'm very gregarious. I use my hands a lot. I can speak for England. I can do, but actually, I, I have a fear of using my voice sometimes. I fear sometimes that I will be laughed at or that people just think, oh, oh, that's just Jobo, oh, she's a right laugh, but, it's fine. You don't take her seriously. She's just going off on one. And that's the kind of thing that we've really got to be careful about when we are serious in this serious space that we're in as a profession, because globally we're not in a great position as societies, and we need more nurses than ever. And so I feel kind of the older I get and the more experience I have of being within the charity sector where I don't have direct political influence, that actually my whole being, my way of being has to change, and I have to adapt to the situation that I'm in. And yes, we can have a laugh and be, but actually, if we do it too much, then people just don't listen to you. So I don't know if anybody's put anything in, Aisha.
Yeah, yes, they have so many. Oh, so many.
Oh my gosh, really? That's
Lots.
fantastic.
So I'm going to quickly read them out. Lack of
Please, that's
confidence,
amazing.
fear of victimization, career
Yeah,
limiting for
yeah.
some individuals, previous experience of victimization, being
Mm,
burnt
mm,
out, fear of bullying,
mhm.
hierarchy, closest to the patient, furthest from the
Yeah,
table where decisions about the patient get made, self-doubt. Um, I've learned from the Insights program to be reflexive leader and not much the traditional
amazing,
hierarchy on
amazing,
leadership. That's fantastic. Agree with
amazing.
responses above that include we don't feel empowered, fear of the outcome of speaking up,
Yeah,
because we're trained to follow a protocol, not to question the
right.
system.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's something about teaching nurses and midwives the skills to articulate at certain levels, learning the language, yes, of influencing, yes, exactly. How do you do that? That pitch,
Wow.
how do you meet? Not when you're in that space, you are not sending your message. You are responding to what their agenda is, and it is that it's
Yeah,
I mean, that's moving into a slightly different space from advocacy, because there is differences between
mm,
advocacy and the political influencing.
yeah.
And I think that's a distinction to be really clear about. But there is that, where is that sweet spot? The way that we will make
Mm.
progress is we have to understand the agenda of the other side.
And I think that's absolutely the case.
Yeah, and just
Or
really interestingly, sorry, fear of being laid off work. We need to do better to teach nursing students, and this one being a female nurse.
yes. So yeah, wow,
Oh,
I mean,
there.
I wonder
Wow,
whether
thank you. That's brilliant, isn't it?
phew. So let's
Really good.
get down to the
Very tough.
nitty-gritty. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. And I think, Gemma, that what is happening in the chat is fueling perhaps some further inquiry that we could do together to extend the series and to really look at this more deeply, because this is really important that we keep that we don't shy away from the hard stuff. And people that know what we do in FoNS know that we don't shy away from the hard stuff at all. We say we do culture and advocacy. When you look at it, if you did some observational work, if you sat in a waiting room or you sat in an emergency department, or you sit on a ward, or sit in a community clinic or in primary care, and you watch everything that's going on, there will be lots of advocacy going on non-verbally as well as verbally. And it's something that, definitely Aisha, talking about the difference between, between influence and advocacy. It's a very, can be a very blurred line, but it's a very, very important distinction. So I think I'm just thinking, because we've only got kind of nearly 10 minutes, that I've got some resources that I will, you can have, but I just wanted to give you just one thing, 5 things to do this month, and or up to 5. I won't put pressure on you, but it would be really great if we could all maybe do 1 or 2 of these things, each one of us today, this month. We've got 40 odd, we've got 40 odd people online, and then we'll have lots and lots of people watching this in their own time later on and in the coming weeks. So, let's ask a courageous question, and maybe share it. Perhaps we could share it on social media about the curious question that we've asked. So please do take a screenshot of this and put it on social media, and let's all do it. Share your learning, and try and speak up in a meeting. Think about it, and but try and do it, and see how that goes, and perhaps plan it beforehand and get a buddy in that meeting to kind of support you with it, with that speaking up if you need to do it. And then who's inspired you? And then thinking about storytelling, what inspires us? Why do we advocate? Why are we nurses and midwives? What's all that about? So this is the further reading. I won't go through it all, but I've just added in this article, which is my Bible. I was with somebody last night called Kylie Ward, who a lot of us know on this call, and she asked one of her kind of gurus, a professor that she's followed and loved all her career, for her kind of top 5 publications that she reads, and it really got me thinking about what are mine, and this is one of them. I reviewed it as part of an editorial that I did during COVID about nurse well-being, which again perhaps is another one. But it's, please, if you do have an hour or so, read this. It'll certainly get your creative juices flowing. So I'll stop sharing.
Jo, can I just come in? What I thought was interesting was someone put in interesting points. I feel that the newer generation of nurses are extremely confident and outspoken, which is an interesting observation.
Interesting.
And I mean, reflecting on what you've said, and thank you so much for the whole kind of making it come alive. And the challenge for us is to ensure that we know we're the most trusted profession. And we have to be very thoughtful about how we articulate our ask or what we are saying. And I think the language we use, so someone saying being outspoken, why do we see it as being outspoken? So I think we have to reframe some of this ourselves and address some of this issue around the confidence and seeing ourselves in these spaces. There's quite a lot of layers to this, isn't there? And it's not an easy, So I think your 5 challenges are really useful, because it's like every behavior, we have to start somewhere, slowly, small, build it. And, you can't just suddenly walk into the room and, it's going to be the thing. And, I see that. I have a role currently as the CNO, and I can tell you, I've taught this stuff for many years. I have got all these years of experience, yet I am still learning every day, and being humble and observing and just sitting back and trying to work it out and see what's happening and navigate, finding the mentors. These are all things I'm still doing. This is not a kind of one day you're going to be in 5 minutes, the thing. It is, we are learning every day until we stop doing this thing that we're doing. So I think it's just a bit of reassurance for everyone that, most challenging roles, each one I've ever had, I'm learning. And, I have to have a conversation with myself that's about, actually, I'm really grounded in who I am, and I need to remember that. And, it's not easy. It doesn't matter where you are in these roles.
Thank you so much. What an important reflection to end on today's session. And as you said, Joanne, I think that this has demonstrated to us we're only scratching the surface on this topic. It makes me think of the motivations that we have to pursue a profession like nursing and midwifery. And often it is about that desire to want to influence change. There's something that's given you that real fire in your belly to want to take an agenda forward. And there's so much about becoming a professional that makes us start to doubt and question our capability and permission to do that going forwards. And I think what you've done for us today is to give us a language to and a literature to help us to understand why this stuff is so difficult, but why it's so inherent and so important to our identity as nurses and midwives. And I'm really, really grateful for what you've initiated today and the thinking and the safety to talk to actually say how difficult this is, no matter where you are in that hierarchy or how experienced you are perceived to be. This is really tough stuff. I guess my final reflection is just to say there's something about not doing this in isolation. You mentioned that word coalition, Aisha, and I do think there is a really important role that Nursing Now Challenge can play in bringing us together as communities and groups on a shared agenda, so that there isn't that vulnerability of being an individual that's speaking up. And we can think about how best to support you to navigate that challenging terrain that you've described there. So today is just the start. I think we've got a very strong sense from our community that we absolutely need to revisit this topic, and we will make that commitment to do that. Thank you again, both of you, for your time. It's incredibly precious and generous of you to be here with us. Thanks to everybody that's joined us today live. There's lots of familiar names in the audience today who are all advocates and influencers themselves, and also to those that are joining us later on and watching this back. As Joanne said, keep the conversation going on social media. Let's make that commitment to taking forward those actions. I will definitely do that before I finish my holidays, and we shall see you all on our next Leadership Insights session in just a couple of weeks' time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you both. Bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.
Bye.